One of my favorite parts of being an NBA fan is witnessing All-Star Weekend. Whether it be watching the once great dunk contest or seeing my favorite players interact, it's a nice change of pace from the grueling 82-game regular season schedule. But I have to admit that my favorite part of All-Star Weekend isn't watching any of the festivities. It's the discourse around what players deserve to play in the game. So today, I'm going to go through my All-Star ballot and figure out which players deserve to play on the East and West teams. But before we start, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to watch more NBA videos just like this one. So without further ado, let's get started by talking about my Eastern Conference All-Stars. If you don't already know, each roster consists of a starting 5 with 2 guards and 3 forwards, and reserves of 2 guards, 3 forwards, and 2 wildcards, which can either be a guard or a forward. To start, let's go through my starting 5, which at this moment has 4 locks. At one of my 2 starting guard positions, I have Tyrese Maxey, and for the 3 starting forwards, I have Jason Tatum, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Joel Embiid. I don't think I have to explain why these 4 are deserving of the starting positions, as the 3 forwards are the best players on the top 3 teams in the East, and Tyrese Maxey is averaging 27 points a game as a second option on the 3rd seed. Where the real debate comes in is that 5th and final starting guard spot, which I've narrowed down to 2 great players, Tyrese Halliburton and Jalen Brunson. Each guy has been a revelation to their team as the leader and point guard of 2 top 6 teams in the East. I wouldn't mind you putting either in the starting spot, but I'm personally going to go with Halliburton, simply because he leads the league in assists per game and is playing this great without a true second option beside him. And now here's where things get tough. After the starters, we have 7 spots remaining in the East. The 2 bench guard positions are fairly simple to figure out, as the aforementioned Brunson deserves that 6th spot, and Damian Lillard, while starting slow, has been one of the key reasons why the Bucks are the 2nd seed right now. His defense is still very below average, but the stats suggest he's actually a net positive on that side of the ball, so take that for what it's worth. And while his efficiency has dropped, his advanced stats show that his offensive impact is pretty much keeping the Bucks in close games. So with Brunson and Lillard at my reserve guards positions, let's move on to the reserve forward positions. I'm going to give that first bench spot to Jaylen Brown, as while his numbers are down, his impact on the league best Celtics has been almost irreplaceable. When he's on the court, the Celtics are plus 9.8 per 100 possessions, and while he has his flaws, Brown is still an effective scorer and defender, and after the starting forwards in the East, there's a clear drop-off to the 4th best forward, who at this moment is Jaylen Brown. After Brown, you have to give the All-Star nod to one of the Heat's stars, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, though I'm not sure their team's performance has been worthy of both of them making it. So for now, I'm going to give the edge to Adebayo, because just based on their play, I feel like Adebayo has been a little more aggressive as an offensive weapon while keeping up his all-defensive level of play on the other side of the ball. Per 100 possessions, the Heat allow about 111 points when Adebayo's on the court. And while I wouldn't normally use this next point as a way to determine who deserves the All-Star spot, Bam Adebayo would probably play in this game, while Jimmy Butler would forego his spot and use All-Star Weekend to rest up. So Adebayo will grab that 2nd reserve forward spot, and for my 3rd and final spot, I'm going to give the nod to Julius Randle. Randle is putting up about 25 points a game to go along with 9 boards and 5 assists for a Knicks team that's been surging thanks to his much improved play. I have to admit that I'm not the biggest Julius Randle fan because his playstyle is just so hard to watch, especially considering he can't shoot the 3-ball and turns the ball over way too much. But those flaws haven't stopped Randle from being one of the 7 or 8 best forwards in the East, and hasn't stopped him from deserving this final All-Star forward reserve spot. And finally, my last 2 spots on the Eastern Conference team are wildcard spots, meaning they can be filled out with either a guard or a forward. My first selection is almost a no-brainer, and someone who could have easily been in starting conversations, and that's Donovan Mitchell. The Cavaliers have had an interesting start to this season, from inconsistent play from their top stars to injuries taking out Darius Garland and Evan Mobley. But the one man who's been consistently great for the Cavs is Donovan Mitchell, whose 28, 6, and 6 a night has kept the Cavs in the 4th to 7th seed range. When he's on the court, the Cavs are plus 11.1 per 100 possessions, which is one of the best marks in the NBA. And while his overall shooting efficiency is down, his defensive numbers are now the best they've ever been. So Mitchell gets my first wildcard spot, and before we get into my second and final spot on this Eastern Conference team, let me go through some honorable mentions. Scottie Barnes has been one of the few bright spots on this awful Raptors team. His play as of late has been inconsistent, but that's what you would expect from a 21-year-old who just got 2 new teammates who average over 15 points a game. He's one of the few guys in the NBA who can pretty much do anything on the court, and if his team were just a little bit better, he probably would have gotten that last spot. But for now, Barnes is going to have to wait another year before making the All-Star team. And finally, and likely controversially, I have Trae Young outside of my All-Star ballot. I know, Young has been playing great this season, putting up 27 points and 10 assists a night. And when I first did this ballot, Young was actually the first guy I had off the bench. But when you go deeper into the advanced stats, Trae is statistically having his worst season since 2020. Normally his stellar offensive game is enough to make him a net positive player, but despite improving defensively in the eye test, his defensive impact on the court is now at one of the worst marks it's ever been at. Even if you take away the advanced stats, the Hawks are still the 11th seed and 7 games behind a top 7 seed. I wouldn't necessarily be mad if Trae made the All-Star team, but at this moment, he would be the first guard on the outside looking in. So for my final spot, I decided to go with Paolo Banchero. The Orlando Magic have cooled off after their great start, and the only reason why they're still fighting for a playoff spot is because of Banchero. And sure, Banchero may have had his off nights, but he's transformed into a big man who uses bully ball to work into the paint, all while becoming a 36% three-point shooter. His offensive contributions on a nightly basis are one of the only reasons why the Magic get to 110 points a night, which is one of the lowest totals in the NBA. And you could call me crazy for putting Banchero over Barnes or Young, but I like to reward guys who contribute to their team's success while putting up great numbers, and Banchero does just that. Now let's move on to the Western Conference, where things are going to get just a little bit tougher. For my starting guards, I have SGA and Luka. I don't think I need to explain my decision here, as these two stars have been 2 of the 5 best players in the NBA this season. And for my starting forwards, I have Jokic, Kawhi, and Durant. Again, no explanation needed here, though I will point out that Kawhi has quietly been having one of his best seasons ever, as his defense is back and better than ever. And Kevin Durant is also shooting a ridiculous 47% from 3 on 5 attempts a game. So with that, the West All-Star starting lineup will be Shea, Luka, Jokic, Kawhi, and Durant. Now on to the bench, where my 2 bench guards are going to be De'Aaron Fox and Anthony Edwards. Fox is having the best season of his career by far, putting up 28 points a night while shooting 38% from 3. The Kings have had their struggles, from role players underperforming to their defense somehow going from bad to really bad. But Fox has picked up the slack and kept the Kings competitive in a year where many had them regressing. As for Anthony Edwards, he's the best player on the best team in the West. He's turning into the guy we all thought he would be when he was drafted first overall in the 2020 NBA draft. But I don't know how many of us were expecting him to be this good at just 22 years old, as he's averaging 26 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists a night, while shooting a career-high 46% from the field and 39% from 3. He's been lights out to start this season, and getting this reserve spot should prove that, considering he's been mentioned before a certain someone in Golden State. After Edwards and Fox, my first 2 reserve forward spots are going to LeBron and Anthony Davis. The Lakers have had an underwhelming start to the season, almost completely in spite of LeBron and AD, who have been relatively healthy and played really well. It's a shoo-in that LeBron will be a starter and likely the captain of the All-Star West team, and it's completely deserved. LeBron is putting up 25 points a game on 52% shooting from the field and 39% shooting from 3. His offensive impact when he's on the court, whether that be directing traffic and setting up shots for his teammates, driving to the rim like it's 2012, or making a dagger 3, is one of the 2 reasons the Lakers are competent on that side of the ball. The other reason is Anthony Davis, who's putting up a 25 and 12 with 2.5 blocks a night. Davis has his struggles, like shooting almost 50% of his shots in the mid-range despite being a below-average mid-range shooter. But he's still been a great defensive anchor, works well as an offensive threat in the paint, and most importantly, has actually played a majority of the games this season. So Davis and LeBron are locks to make the All-Star team, and I spent a ridiculous amount of time trying to figure out who deserves that 3rd and final reserve forward spot, and I ultimately decided to give it Domantas Sabonis. Sabonis has been playing out of this world recently, averaging 20 points, 13 rebounds, and 8 assists a night for a Kings team that, as I previously mentioned, has had some role players struggling. What makes Sabonis so special to me is that he's such a great player despite not being athletically gifted. His basketball IQ and footwork is some of the best in the league, and he attacks the rim at the right angles to hit these shots that you wouldn't expect him to make. Sabonis is just a great player, and the fact that he barely makes this All-Star team says a lot about the quality of the Western Conference. And finally, we're down to our final 2 All-Star Wildcard selections, and the first player who makes the cut is Steph Curry. It's been interesting to watch Curry operate as he's still playing at an extremely high level, while his co-stars Klay Thompson and Draymond Green have been absolutely terrible this season. And despite shooting only 40% from 3 and being the leader of a sub-500 team, it's Steph Curry that we're talking about here, and his impact alone has single-handedly kept the Warriors afloat in this grueling Western Conference. You can nitpick him for his subpar defense and shockingly low assist numbers, but you can't deny his overall talent as the greatest shooter of all time. We may be seeing Curry decline at the slightest bit, but he still is, without a doubt, one of the best players in the league. And before we get into the 12th and final spot, let me go through some of my honorable mentions. I talked about him earlier, but it's a shame that Alperen Şengün doesn't make my final All-Star ballot, because he's been lights out this entire season. The Rockets had little to no expectations coming into this season, but a big reason why the Rockets are in the hunt for a play-in spot is because of Şengün, who's putting up 22 points a game as the number 1 option. He's almost like a mix of Sabonis and Jokic, in the sense that he gets to his spots with ease and finds a way to make the shot despite how difficult it may be. And while he doesn't make my ballot this season, I would be shocked if he's not the first injury replacement and doesn't play in this year's All-Star game. And lastly, I'm going to talk about Paul George, who's been quietly having one of his best seasons of his career, averaging 24 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists a night while shooting 42% from 3. He's just been a fun player to watch on a nightly basis, and he's been the second option on one of the best teams in all of basketball. You could definitely argue he deserves my last spot, and I wouldn't mind anyone having him on their ballot. When he's on the court, the Clippers are one of the best teams offensively, and from the eye test, he looks pretty solid defensively too. But like with Şengün, the Western Conference is stacked, and unfortunately, he doesn't make my ballot this season. So who does get the final spot on this roster? The man who gets my last All-Star nod is none other than Devin Booker, who has thrived in his new role as point guard for the Phoenix Suns. Booker is averaging 26 points, 8 assists, and 5 rebounds a night, and when he's on the court, the Phoenix Suns are at plus 7.9 per 100 possessions, as his offensive impact is one of the highest in all of basketball. But what makes this Booker season even more impressive to me is that he's showing clear signs of growth as a basketball player. Normally when you think of Booker, you think of a high-level scorer, someone who can torch you at every level. But look at some of his most recent box scores. In a win against the Kings on January 16th, he only put up 16 points, but had 11 assists to go along with it. In a win against the Miami Heat on January 5th, he put up only 20 points, but had 10 assists and 5 boards. What this is showing me is that Booker is learning to be an effective basketball player even if his shot isn't falling. These improvements, combined with his already impressive scoring ability and surprisingly decent defensive stats, give me no choice but to include Booker on my All-Star ballot. Whether you agree or disagree with me, I think one thing is for certain. The Western Conference is going to absolutely smoke the Eastern Conference. But what do you think? Comment below my biggest snub and the player you think should make the All-Star game over one of the players I mentioned. And go ahead and like this video, and remember to subscribe for more NBA videos just like this one. I'm Julian with TalkBackSports, and I'll see you next time.